Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hanink here with fellow panelists Mario Ramos-Reyes and Valerie Niemeyer. Today we'll continue to discuss two unmentionables, religion and politics. Our welcome guest is Jeff Culbreath, a married father of six residing in the, as he describes them, obscure suburbs of Sacramento. He works in the apparel industry, drives his busy kids around, and tries to be a low-maintenance husband to his hardworking wife. He enjoys writing on various topics and has maintained several blogs over the years. Let's begin in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Let us pray. O God, who have taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that in the same Spirit we may be truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Jeff, by way of introduction, I know we want you to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. By way of introduction, could you please tell us a bit about yourself and your family?
Well,
you could forget the part about the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Okay.
So your introduction, I think, covered the basics, but I'm a 57-year-old, fourth generation Californian. Spent most of my life here in Northern California, Sacramento Valley. I grew up on a almond farm. We call them almonds in Butte County. And so that's sort of, I think that whole experience really kind of set the tone for a lot of my temperament and thinking over the years. I never really got the rural life out of my blood. Moved to Sacramento 2 hours away and hour and a half away, more or less. And have been here, stayed for 20 years, moved back up to Glenn County this time, and homesteaded on so-called homesteading, I think. That's a stretch, but attempted to homestead on 20 acres in Glenn County for 8 years. And
you fought the weeds, and the weeds won. I'm
telling you, I did. I had a weed farm. We had mostly pasture. We raised goats, Dexter cattle, rented it out sometimes, and we had chickens, 2 big gardens, planted 150 fruit trees. We had a roaring little project going there for a while. That was fun, but it didn't last, and we ended up here back in the Sacramento area. We have 6 children and 3 still at home. So here we are.
All right. Very good. Mario, you want to lead us forward?
Well, yes. I just learned that you were influenced by Russell Kirk, which is, I think, from Michigan. Dr. Hanink knew him well.
The sage of Acosta, the sage of Acosta.
The sage of Acosta, yes.
Right. Russell Kirk and Wendell Berry and Neil Postman, which caught my attention about Neil Postman. In what ways these people influence your life or the way that you do things, or your politics, if you will?
Yes, well, Russell Kirk, I think if I could point to one writer, one thinker who was the greatest influence on my own temperament and thinking, it would be Russell Kirk. Sadly, I did not know him. I wish I had. He's one of the few writers I think that I would actually have liked to have met in person. I came across Russell Kirk in college when I was sort of a Republican Party activist, I guess. I fancied myself a diehard Republican, a conservative, and so forth. And this was in the late 80s, early 90s. I came across Kirk. I think I first picked up the Intercollegiate Review, and which led me to the Conservative Mind and others of works of his. And I was floored because this was not what I thought conservatism was at all. In fact, I read this and I'm thinking, these are the other guys, you know. But because if you remember his canons or principles of conservatism included things like an affection for the variety and diversity of classes and peoples and communities. And my thinking as a Republican of that time, no, we want everybody the same. We want everybody middle class. We want everybody, all in the same. We were big on sameness, right? Kirk talked a lot about the necessity of classes, and even Republicans back in the day were very egalitarian in their thinking, right? It was like, the accusation that we received from liberals was that we were elitist. This was back when things were the other way. They've kind of flipped since then. But back then, Republicans were perceived as elitist and purely representing the money interests, corporations, country clubs, and so forth, right? And so the retort was, no, we're egalitarian. We want everybody to be middle class, and free market economics is how we're going to get there. And government needs to get out of the way and let equality naturally happen. So that whole thing about classes and hierarchy, social hierarchy, was a game changer in my mind, and it made me start to observe and just look around and think about the people I met and I knew. And yeah, he's right. We don't like to talk about it, and maybe ASP circles are especially uncomfortable perhaps with this, but we have and we require a sort of hierarchical order. Every society does, no matter what they might say about themselves. And so I'd like to keep it honest. I'm with Kirk. Well, if we're going to have it, let's be honest about it. Let's admit that we have these differences, and they're okay. There's no shame in it. There's nothing wrong with that, and it's no shame to be poor. It's no shame to work at McDonald's. It's no shame to do what you need to do in life and to know your place, I guess, right? And so that was a real game changer. It was not a social climbing conservatism. So there's that, right? And then he also was very big on the idea of imperfectibility, and that man is not perfectible, and that utopian sin and things of that nature. And again, this was really the thing, right? There's going to be no more problems. We're going to fix poverty. We're going to fix suffering, and all of this, right? It was very ambitious, and so this sober understanding of the imperfectibility of man that Kirk had was also a game changer for me. Many other things. He just got into my bones, I guess, and I don't think he would approve of all of my opinions today. But here's the thing about Kirk, as you know, Dr. Hanink, if you knew him, he didn't mind that. I mean, he engaged with all kinds of people, and he had respect for all kinds of people. And again, this was not Republican Party orthodoxy either. It was like, libs, evil, and Kirk was like, he was broad, he was generous, he was magnanimous in his approach to society and to the intellectual life, right? And so I so appreciated that. In fact, in one of his articles about ideology, and I want to get to that in a second, but he says, how did he put it? Ideologues really demonize everybody who's outside the tribe. And he said, conservatives, real conservatives, have the habit of dining with the opposition. So, he wanted to talk about it. He wanted to hash things out, and he was really interested in what anybody thought. So even if he didn't agree, and sometimes, almost violently didn't agree, which is great. The other thing about Kirk that that really hit home is that he presented conservatism as the antithesis of ideology. Again, GOP orthodoxy was this. Our political doctrine is almost our faith, right? And so for Kirk, the ideologue or the liberal looks to liberalism for its moral guidance. If you're a liberal, you find your morality in liberalism. If you're a conservative, in Kirk's sense, you find your morality from your religion. You go outside of your political bubble or your social bubble. You don't draw truth from conservatism. He was insistent on that. He said when conservatism becomes an ideology, then it's not conservative anymore. It's dead, right? And so so it's like now as a Catholic, I wasn't Catholic at the time. I have permission from Kirk to get my economic ideas and my political ideas from the Catholic Church itself, right? And so I think Kirk would have a lot of respect for that. I'm probably more left-leaning, if you will, economically than he was, but I get that from the social encyclicals of the Catholic Church. I'm Catholic first, conservative second, and in fact, you can't be a conservative and flip that around. So, in a nutshell, I guess that was Kirk's influence, an ongoing influence in my thinking.
Now, Mario was interested in Neil Postman, right?
Neil Postman,
Yes. What
the
about
social
that?
critic.
Wow, yeah, Neil Postman was another eye opener. So I love Postman. He really made me start to think about technology and its, and the downsides of technology. So before I ran into Postman, I was reading people like George Gilder, right, who is a GOP luminary and a champion of technology and technological progress and innovation and, all of this. I don't know where he is today. He's probably waving the AI flag out there someplace. I don't know, but Postman made me realize how technology it's not just the content of what we get from technology, but it's technology itself and how that changes culture and how that changes us as individuals. He made so many great observations, like our appreciation for art and music, for example. When you have music, when you're listening to Vivaldi's Four Seasons, every time you're on hold on the telephone, you kind of lose some appreciation for Vivaldi's Four Seasons, right? And when you see art everywhere, it's on your screen, it's the background on your computer screen, it's just all over the place. Even great art is all over the place. You kind of become numb to it. So technology puts all of these things everywhere all the time. And as a result, the result is not it doesn't enrich our life, actually. It detracts from our life. And I had to think about that. It's like, wow, that's really true. And also, the impact on our just on our daily habits. He was writing when television was the was the big problem. And he really got into how television, and I grew up with TV in the house constantly, gives us these dopamine hits, right? Like the picture on the TV screen, I think he said at that time, changed once every 3 seconds. Boom, boom, boom. And if it doesn't, like in the early days when we had Walter Cronkite reading the news and that's all you saw was his picture, for 10 minutes, it's way different from the way things were when Postman came along. Things were fast, boom, and the news was bells and whistles and noise and sirens and keyboards and the whole thing, right? And so we're way overstimulated by technology. And this, even at that time, was impacting our attention spans and our ability to follow an argument, our ability to, to think about consequences and so on. The other thing I really got from Postman was the negative impact of the information glut, which was bad when he was writing in the 90s, but wow, it's way worse now. And we have all this so-called information that we don't know what to do with. We have no context for it. There's no follow-up. We have no way of falsifying or verifying. It's just shot at us, right, from all these directions. And we think we know things as a result, and we don't. He gave one example of a poll of, if I remember correctly, I might get this wrong, but Americans were polled about, he made this up, about should we give economic aid to Nicaragua? And the results came back, no, we should not give economic aid to Nicaragua. And the majority thought that Nicaragua was a country in sub-Saharan Africa. Another, large percentage didn't know what economic aid meant. They were confused about that. All these assumptions in the question that the public that answered the question really was clueless about. Yet they gave answers, and that is presented to us as public opinion. So Postman gave me a critical eye when it comes to things like that, right? And information. And I'm still suckered and fooled by all of this information glut from time to time, I think. Probably more than I realize. But the first step, I guess, is knowing your vulnerability to that and seeing it's a problem. And I hope, I wish his views were more widely promulgated and we could get to maybe some answers as to how to curb this problem, because it's a huge problem.
So Jeff has undergone some changes, and Valerie, maybe you'd like to take us to a major change that he's undergone.
Yeah, I am curious. You mentioned that you weren't Catholic always, so I'm curious about that journey into the church. Wouldn't you share
Oh, wow.
that adventure with us? Briefly, I guess. We have
How
so
much
many
time do
things
we
to talk about today.
We have a lot of
know, it's
topics. All right. All right. The 5-minute version. Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up nominally Lutheran. My parents were, my mom and my stepfather were on and off Lutherans, and more off than on. But when there was anything, they kept their ties to the Lutheran Church, and the Lutheran Church was in the Scandinavian tradition, the ELCA, which I think had previously been ALC or something like that. But it's from the my heritage is Danish on my mother's side, and so that was our so-called religion. And well, that particular Lutheran denomination is the largest in the United States and is also very, very liberal, if you will. Very, very much. There was a little Christianity there, I guess. Not a whole lot. The liturgy, though, was nice. But pretty much at that time, it was, anti-nukes and peace and cannabis and, not a whole lot of Christianity there. But it was what we did. So I went to Sunday school, was confirmed, and so on. In college, I fancied myself an agnostic, I think. I had a libertarian phase and an Ayn Rand phase, and, I never really went all the way to atheism, but I had landlords that were devout Baptists in their 80s, German Baptists, and they would give me tracts, talk to me about God, and they invited me to a men's retreat one time with their church. I went to it. By this time, I had so much respect for Christians that I knew, and I kind of wanted to believe. Well, that retreat was a big deal because my roommate was a motorcycle, like a biker guy with, probably covered with tats, really hairy, looked like he'd had a hard life. And I kept him up all night with questions about the Bible, about God, and all of this. And he very patiently answered what he could, and he didn't answer what he didn't know, and that was refreshing. Long story short, my aunt gave me a copy of Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I read that, stayed up all night thinking, because at the end of that book, he doesn't give you a lot of options. You have to choose. I was a fence sitter, and Lewis kicked me off the fence, and so I'm laying awake there, going, okay, well, now what? Because I wanted to be honest. I wanted to be, I kind of valued integrity. Anyway, fast forward, decided to go back to church, the Lutheran church by default, but I wanted something with more meat. And so we ended up, I was engaged to my wife by that time, and we ended up in the Missouri Synod. First time I went to the Missouri Synod liturgy, it was overwhelming. It was beautiful, very traditional. Excuse me. When they confessed their sins and went down on their knees like a wave, I was like, "Where is the door? This is a cult. Get me out of here!" I really. But at the same time, it's like maybe I'm a sinner too. Anyway, that kind of launched my theological inquiries really more seriously then. So I was a Lutheran for quite a while. We were married in the Lutheran church. My wife is Vietnamese. She was Buddhist and converted in the Lutheran church. In college and in life, I met a lot of great Catholics. I subscribed to First Things probably the first year it was out, and was reading a lot of Catholic stuff and teaching Sunday school in the Wisconsin Synod eventually. And I just realized that Lutheran theology is just not holding up. I was always referring to my students to the Lutheran tradition for exegesis, for interpretation. And we're not supposed to have a tradition. It's supposed to be the Bible alone, right? And we don't need a tradition. Well, we had one, and we used it, and we needed it, and it wasn't right. So I felt like, well, if you're going to have a tradition, it ought to be a self-respecting tradition that believed in itself. And so my first son was born, and that shattered my belief in total depravity, Lutheran total depravity. Because I'm looking over at my newborn son and just trying to think how this kid is totally depraved and deserves an eternity in hell just by virtue of breathing. And I'm like, that's not right. I don't think that's true.
And he turned 2.
Now, by the time he turned 2, I was back to total depravity. No, I'm just kidding. But so Lutheran total depravity fell as one of the pillars, and then sola scriptura fell eventually. Sola fide fell. As I was reading St. Augustine, we recited the Athanasius Creed in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and the Wisconsin Synod, and I thought, oh, Athanasius Creed, that sounds ancient. I looked up St. Athanasius. I came across the life of St. Anthony of the Desert. We just celebrated his feast. And I read The Life of Anthony by St. Athanasius. And I came away from that. Neither Athanasius nor Anthony were Lutherans. They would have been excommunicated by Luther. Luther, I read a lot of Luther. I cut my teeth on Luther. Luther had a very medieval mind, which also helped push me in the Catholic direction. But his ideas on some things were screwy, and Athanasius and Anthony were there was just works righteousness in his terms all over their lives, right? And he wouldn't have approved of any of that. And so I'm like, well, why am I in a church that recites the Athanasian Creed, but wouldn't allow Athanasius to take communion, or Saint Anthony of the Desert? There's something wrong here. They certainly wouldn't allow them to preach or be ministers in this church. Anyway, went to RCIA. At that time, I was very traditional liturgically, and I went to the Novus Ordo Mass, the new Mass, which I attend now. But then it was like I was going backwards. It just seemed very more Protestant than where I was at right now. And I was kind of scandalized by that, by some of the liberalism in the Catholic Church. And so some of that was pride, and I didn't have the right, motives, I think. But ended up in the Anglican province of Christ the King. I went to their liturgy one time, and, priest was facing the altar, and people kneeled and received on the tongue, and it was very, very traditional, kind of like the old Lutheran way, but even more Catholic. And I thought, okay, well, this is it. This is all that's left. And so I was in this Anglican jurisdiction for 5 years. I went to seminary, continued to read and study and pray as a Catholic. My devotional life was Catholic, basically, and so were my fellow seminarians. But we were in this tiny jurisdiction, not in communion with the Episcopal Church or the See of Canterbury, that was in communion with nobody. There were maybe 5,000 of us around the country. And that just didn't, that just was unsustainable as well. Bishop called me into the office during break and with the dean, and they wanted to talk to me about what they thought was even for them, and they were very traditional, was my excessive Catholic beliefs and things like the Immaculate Conception of Our Lady and so on, which was permitted. But I was a little bit too, I don't know, a little bit too out there with it. Shortly thereafter, they didn't expel me from the seminary. I was not told to leave. I was invited back. But in the interim, I was invited to a Latin Mass by a friend of mine who had also been in the same Anglican jurisdiction, but became Catholic. And I went to the Latin Mass with the Fraternity of St. Peter on a Friday. It was the first Friday. And that was it, man. It was like, this is home. It's still here. All right. So I had a very, I think, still not the correct idea of the Catholic Church at the time. It was really a little bit too much about liturgy. I love liturgy, and I still love the traditional Mass. I went there for 20 years. But I think I hung a little bit too much importance on that particular aspect. But that's what hooked me, and that's what brought me into the Catholic Church, was the Latin Mass. And it was like, okay, I'm home. We never looked back. Several years ago, I had a bit of a, I guess, a fallout with the traditionalist movement. I'm not a part of it anymore. But that's how I became Catholic. Valerie, I hope that is the short version. Sorry about
No, that's all
the
right.
length of that.
That's all right. I was thinking you went from a Lutheran church where there wasn't a lot of, quote unquote, a lot of Christianity, into the Catholic Church where there's still, quote unquote, not a lot of Christianity.
In some quarters,
you grew up in the church, you get that. Well, where are the Christians? If you believe what you say you believe, why are you not going to Mass? I mean, there's, our pews are full of a lack of Christianity as well. So
Indeed.
but it's neat to hear how you always say judge judge a faith by people who are living it, not by those who aren't, right? So it's
Yeah, no, that was without that, it wouldn't have happened, right? Because I knew very holy Catholic people. And I also knew really horrible people that were Catholic and went to Mass. And I worked with guys who they went to Mass every Sunday and they were watching, porn on their computers at work and worse. And it was so there's this in the Catholic Church, there's these extremes. It's kind of an all or nothing religion. Like you either believe it and you try to live it, or it's just, water off a duck's back and you go through the motions. There's not a whole lot of in between there. But I did know some very holy and great Catholics, and without their witness, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be in the church today.
Well, thanks for sharing.
It's been said of the church that here comes everybody.
Yeah. Was that James Joyce? I was trying to think of who said that. Okay, yeah.
Well, Mario, do you want to redirect us towards politics and governance and why I'm not a Republican and what the government needs if it's ever going to go anywhere and that sort of thing?
So, where do you start doing politics? In the Republican Party? And
yes,
how it was? You're saying that there is a vision that you inherited from Kirk, which was not, let's put it this way, libertarian, if you will, or pure economics rather than culture. And so you joined the Republican Party, which mainly is about economics, or used to be. I think it still is. Well, we can discuss that. But why then you joined the Republican Party where this view was prevalent while you were more inclined to this view of Russell Kirk?
Yes. Well, I discovered Kirk, again, I think around, I couldn't say, but probably right around 1990, thereabouts, maybe a little earlier. My first presidential election in which I voted was 1984, and that was Reagan and Carter. And my family background, we were in a rural farming community, and my family background was Republican by default, and so I was Republican by default anyway, just like we were Lutheran by default. But so before I found Kirk, I was a very solid Republican voter, and what really drew me in. And I think you gentlemen, and I think Valerie will understand this. I hope there's a little nuance here, but what really drew me in was Ronald Reagan's, what seemed to me to be his transparent goodness as a human being, his decency, and his persuasiveness. Right, he was a very persuasive man. He was taunted as just an actor. But he believed these things. For example, on abortion, today, our so-called pro-life politicians, they're pro-life on paper, but they don't lead with it. You have to back them into a corner to get them to talk about it. Ronald Reagan led with it. He led with it in his speeches. He led with it on the campaign trail. He wrote a book about it on his own initiative. He was a convert to the pro-life cause. He largely made me really think about life issues, because I was a Republican and because he was so revered. I loved Ronald Reagan. I realize now, much later, that his economic policies were a disaster. I don't support those, but as a man and as a leader and as someone that I would be happy to have babysit my kids, or socialize with, or borrow something from, or lend something to. I loved Reagan. I love that we could have, as a country, a leader that was such a decent human being. I thought that was incredible. And that was one reason why the whole Trump thing was just horrifying to me, appalling, and really extremely discouraging. But so Reagan was like the engine, right? And so I began to read George Gilder and Milton Friedman. I really got into the whole libertarian ideology for a while. Subscribed to Reason magazine and was really thinking like a libertarian. I wanted to privatize everything. But Kirk slowly, this didn't happen overnight with Kirk, but his influence really slowly caused me to start questioning some of that orthodoxy in the party. And then, of course, my conversion to Catholicism and reading the social encyclicals of the church, that also softened me up and led to, over the years, disenchantment with Republican economics. So it wasn't, I wasn't always a hardliner on that. I kind of just had a gradual awakening, I guess, and with Kirk and the church being very influential in that regard.
Let's go ahead to a more general question here. Can we get good government without good people? And if not, how are we going to get good people? And are we stuck because we can't get good people? We can't get good government, and when we have bad government, bad people become worse?
Right. That is the question. That really is the linchpin of the whole political and economic problem. I was just kind of rereading Quadragesima Anno last night, and St. John the 23rd's Mater et Magistra. And I was just reminded that the church, even with its very bold economic ideas, insists that it cannot be done, that there's no hope without moral reform. That has to come first. And so can we get good government without good people? I guess so. The first and obvious answer is no. We cannot have good government without good people. And I don't have a whole lot of confidence in the American people today, right? I know a lot of them, and I love people. I'm all for people. I love people, but in terms of having the right moral priorities to govern, I don't think that's going to work. So now that's the simple short answer. But here's where you can have some hope, and I'll go back to Kirk on this. Society is not monolithic, right? Everybody is not as messed up as everybody else. There's a preponderance of people on one side and then those on the other, and there's a spectrum in between in terms of their moral suitability to govern themselves or govern a country, right? So then we can't say that all of society is bad most of the time. We can say that there is a part of society that does have its head on straight. And how then do we create a system that encourages that element to govern? That element can be a minority. That can be a small minority. And so then we can have a good government without having good people yet, right? Well, what is that? So who's governing, right? Who's governing even in our democratic egalitarian system? Well, who's governing in our democratic egalitarian system is the elite. We have elites, whether we want to admit it or not. We have elites. Those are the people who are governing. Now, are they the right elites? No. So we need somehow to create a system of new elites that are not dominated by money, elites that are not, slaves of capital and special interests and so on. We need elites with the right priorities. And so I think the long-term project is the creation of new elites and hopefully the conversion of some old ones that are fit to govern. And then we don't need a majority. We just need these competent people that have the right moral priorities to be in positions of power and authority to make the kinds of changes persuasively to the public and to move things along. So there is hope, but the hope is not in, a democratic majority right now. I think we do need to create new elites, and maybe we need a different word because we're kind of allergic to that word, elite. I don't really care what you call it, but we need that new subset of the population that is fit to govern, that is competent, that has the talent and the energy and the right moral priorities and the imagination to steer things in the right direction.
Mario, as our guest just said that we have to bid farewell to democracy.
Probably, but
Probably.
because
And then he wants to move on.
Let me, it's more nuanced than that. I think what what you are saying, I think, is very clear. There is no politics without human beings, and there is no good politics without conversion. So everything began with a human being who transformed his or her own life, beginning in the family. So perhaps we need to start talking about communities, not society as such. Community is more formed by affection, by belief, by religion belief. So the word conversion, I think, is key. And I think Jacques Maritain was clear about that. Otherwise, the only thing that we are going to transform is almost nothing. So now, if that is the case, that democracy as such need religious faith. And so Christian democracy is the way to go. That's the claim of Maritain, because we need that conversion from the beginning. Now, if that is the case, and that has been my concern over the past 10 years, we are building political system or political parties in order to, quote unquote, convert people. And that's the wrong tool. So we need to begin in the church to form those communities. Now, the church has some issues right now, which I don't think is supporting much of that conversion, rather than some issues which are political issues. So I think this is the situation. So when we say, well, I distrust democracy, well, not democracy as such, democracy in the way that is portrayed by some enlightened way of thinking. But if we look at the source, which is the family, which is in profound crisis, this is, I think, the foundation. So I don't know, it's a long, convoluted rant, but this is my view. And by the way, if you look at the development of any democracy in the West, they need to have some constraint. And the constraint is not come from democracy itself, rather than for something else. And is what is called republic. In other words, the idea of the republic or republicanism is the one who limit the power of democratic ethos. So we have the example right now, at this moment in Argentina. The government is falling apart and began 3 weeks ago, a month ago. Why? Democracy is not working. There's no check and balances. And so it's ironic. And what is the issue there? people just pursue their own self-interest, and they don't care about the common good because they don't have awareness of what really good is, much less what is common to that good. Okay, I'm gonna stop there, but I think it's key what you said, Jeff.
Yes, I agree. I agree with what you said as well. I think, when you talk about the people not having an appreciation for the common good, I think it has to be asked, does democracy itself, even republicanism, if I could even stretch it that far, as we know it, I think it can be different, but as we know it, does that encourage people to think about the common good? I think the premise of democracy and even republicanism is, the Republican statesman, small r Republican statesman, is representing his people, but he's only representing his people. Where's the common good in that? So, and then now that has degrees of problems, right? The best scenario is where he's representing the true interest of his people, not their opinions, but their true interests. And that can lead to the common good. If the interests of the people in his district, they're tied to the interests of everybody else, right? So, in a roundabout way, you can get to the common good with that. But in reality, what happens is he represents their opinions because he wants to be reelected in 2 years or 4 years or whatever. And so he's not going to do that unless he represents their opinions. Well, as we know, the opinions of people and the interests of people don't always coincide. In fact, they're very often at odds. One of the writers that was influential in my thinking as well, and I'm going to mispronounce his name because I just don't know how to say it, but Eric
loudly and with confidence.
Eric von Ledeen. Did I say
That's
that
right.
correct?
That's got to be right.
Okay. He makes the distinction between democracy and demophilia. Democracy being the rule of the people, demophilia being the love of the people. And he prefers demophilia, right? Because that is rule for the love of the people, for the good of the people, right? Not necessarily for their opinions, because their opinions are easily manipulated by demagogues, easily manipulated by politicians and the media. They're fickle, and as Neil Postman showed us, we can't really count on them to know what they're talking about. And it's not their fault because they're being asked to have opinions. We're always being asked to have opinions about things that we don't know anything about, but we got to have an opinion. That seems to be the pressure of democracy, is to force us to have opinions about things we don't know anything about. When I have a ballot and I go to vote, usually 1/2 to 2/3 of my ballot is blank. Now, I'm not ignorant, and I'm not a scholar or anything. I have an education. I read. I stay on top of the news. I still don't know who most of these people are on my ballot, or the topics I'm supposed to be informed about. I still haven't had the time to study it, or maybe I haven't had the interest to study it. And so I don't vote on it. I don't feel like I should vote on it. Yet we're all being told we have to vote and have opinions on things that we're just completely ignorant about. That's a problem. And that's one of the problems with democracy. So if we're going to solve that nut, I think we have to somehow get that beast under control.
Valerie, it's more clear to me that these two gentlemen are cockeyed optimists. What can you do to redirect them?
Yeah. Well, I think I want to, there's several questions that we pondered ahead of time talking about. And, some of the topics are public policy. How does policy play into helping people be good or communities to be strengthened? We also, pluralism and solidarity, gift economy, ownership society, marriage and family and policy related to extended families. These are some things that we thought we might talk about. We're kind of coming to the end. So I'm wondering what does your mind and heart want to focus on here in these last 5 minutes or so?
Wow. All right. Maybe two things. So briefly, I'll try to be brief. Can public policy make people be good? To inartfully phrase that. Can public policy impact? Well, first of all, we know very well public policy can impact behavior very, very strongly. I want to give one example that I wish we thought more about when it comes to other issues, but and I'm a pipe smoker, so I don't necessarily agree with what happened here, but here's what happened with tobacco and cigarette smoking. Sometime 60s or 70s, I think 60s probably, it became known that cigarette smoking was bad for your health, right? And shortly thereafter, it was launched a widespread anti-smoking campaign at every level of government. Every level of government, federal, state, local. We saw the billboards against smoking. We saw the TV commercials against smoking. You saw the posters in the workplace against smoking. It was just everywhere. Everywhere was the anti-smoking message. And smoking was not banned. It was not banned, but it was reduced. I think I looked it up the other day or yesterday. I think in 1954, something like 45% of Americans were smokers. In 2018, 16% are smokers. This campaign, in which billions of dollars were spent over decades, made a huge, huge difference in that particular activity. And some of that was propaganda, if I can use that term, about secondhand smoke, right? You know, don't smoke in your house or in your car or around people because secondhand smoke kills too. Remember all that? And so, you know, we began to feel guilty, right? About, maybe I shouldn't smoke around. I smoke with my kids on my lap, by the way. I'm not saying this is right, but it worked really well. Okay, well, if we had a pro-life administration, a really pro-life administration at in the state or in the federal level, any level, why in the world wouldn't we do that? To educate the public about abortion, about the effects of abortion on women and so on. Why don't we do that? I mean, maybe we can't ban it, but we can do that much, right? And why aren't we doing that? Why for decades and decades has nothing like that happened? If we really, I think, wanted to make a difference, the government, and I mean the government, the state, can make a difference in the moral behavior of people. And I think that is a salient example, even without passing laws against behavior. That's a whole different question. But just as it's bully pulpit, we can make a difference. The state can make a difference in changing moral behavior. Okay. And then the next thing I want to talk about, if I have time, is the gift economy a little bit. Do I have time?
2
A few
minutes.
minutes.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of economic reforms, I think the gift economy is hugely important. A gift economy is not barter. It's not exchange. It's what happens when you make dinner for your family. It's what happens when you give your neighbor a ride to the doctor because she's disabled. It's what happens when you mow somebody's lawn without remuneration because they're your neighbor. When you do things for other people, right? And these activities, my neighbor could hire an Uber to take him to the doctor, let's say, but I do it for him instead. Okay, if he hires an Uber, that adds to the GDP. That's economic growth. But if I do it because he's my neighbor, that does not add to the GDP. Maybe that detracts from the GDP. But guess what? We're a better country. We're a better society. We're a better community because the gift economy is alive in those things. Well, you might remember Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, in which he documents the decline of civic involvement of Americans across, all kinds of metrics, church involvement, PTA, schools, civic involvement, at government and so on, all these things, all these have declined sharply over the last few decades, even when he was writing. And, the question is why. He had some theories. But what that means is the gift economy has tanked, and the gift economy makes us a poorer country while our GDP has gone up. All right. So I'd like to suggest we stop worshiping the GDP and economic growth, and Americans need more opportunities for gift. Policy-wise, what could that be? That could be more leisure time, right? We need to not have, the incessant work for such a huge part of the population. 45% of our population makes $15 an hour or less, and they're working, way too much, and they have no time for the gift economy. They have to buy everything, right? They have to, you see them, buying meals because they don't have time to cook, that kind of thing, right? So we need to make time for people. Somehow we need to put a dent in our entertainment culture. We need to also, part of the backing up, making time for people, there are reforms like my favorite, I think, is the negative income tax. That takes the pressure off of people at a certain level, where they can still give, right, in that way, in many ways, without, without obsessing over mere survival, right? So, so I don't know, I'm out of time, but that's, I think we really need to focus on expanding our gift economy and the kinds of policies that would make that possible.
Strong, important ideas. Two quick lines from Peter Morin, co-founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, and then the gospel for today. Peter used to say we need to be a society of go-givers rather than go-getters. And he also said that what we ought to hope for from government is a society in which it's a little bit easier to be good, a little bit easier to be good. Well, at the end, we always return to the good news itself. Today's gospel is from Mark. Jesus summoned the crowd again and said to them, "Hear me, all of you, and understand. Nothing that enters from outside can defile that person, but the things that come out from within are what defile." When he got home away from the crowd, his disciples questioned him about the parable. He said to them, "Are even you likewise without understanding? Do you not realize that everything that goes into a person from outside cannot defile, since it enters not the heart, but the stomach, and passes out to the latrine? Thus he declared all foods clean. But what comes out of the man, that is what defiles him. From within the man, from his heart, come evil thoughts, unchastity, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, licentiousness, envy, blasphemy, arrogance, folly. All these evils come from within, and they defile. Come, Lord Jesus, come."
Amen.
Thank you.
Yes.
Very good.
Thank you all. I enjoyed being here. Thank you so much.
Way more sober than your posts. And you didn't even bring up that daft idea of monarchy. Good for you, you. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you. You're
Bye-bye.
welcome. God bless you all. Bye-bye.